Mr. Anthony Ojoko joins us now. He's the Executive Secretary, National Human Rights Commission, and we're still talking about the conduct of the polls and perhaps the human rights part of, the voters and where their rights are breached while they try to exercise their civic duties. We'll talk to Mr. Anthony Ojoko this morning. Thank you for coming on Sunrise Daily.
Thank you, Mokwe.
Did you also have monitors out on the field monitoring what was happening in Kogi and Bayelsa?
Yes, of course we did, both in Kogi and Bayelsa. We, as is normal with our functions, to monitor human rights violations. So our focus is not necessarily on INEC or whatever, but our focus is on the ability for people to cast their votes, exercising their franchise freely, without intimidation, without molestation, without threat of injury to them, and so on and so forth. So, so most of the time, our monitoring focuses on security agencies, and then the act of hoodlums, threats that could happen in polling stations, or situations like that can make people not to come out freely. So you start looking at our activities even before the election itself, because if the climate is not conducive, if there is already violence, people are being killed, people are being hurt, of course, old women may, for instance, not want to come out because they cannot run for their dear lives if there's any pandemonium at the polling station. And then most well-meaning people will not want to, if there's...
Be a part of the process.
Exactly. And that is why most times we also discourage undue militarization of the electoral process, because no matter how you put it, a lot of people don't want to see gun-toting soldiers and policemen all around them. So you see that the best practice actually is that even police officers involved in the election process are not supposed to carry guns. So we look out for that when we get to the polling station to make sure that, and that is why you will see that it will be outlawed that personal security aides to politicians should not follow them to polling stations because they may be carrying arms. So all police officers that are armed will not be seen in the polling stations because they could intimidate people and people will no longer be able to exercise their free will to vote.
So what did you notice in the elections then? These are some of the things that you look out for. There have been grave allegations against the Nigerian police in the conduct of the elections. We didn't hear much on the Nigerian army. From what we understand, that a lot of them stayed within the borders of the state where the elections were being conducted. But I don't know if that's what you also noticed as well, and what you make of the conduct of the lead agency responsible for security in the polls.
Well, from what we saw from the video clips, you could see that security agencies were shooting in the police stations. Well, at least they had the uniforms of the military and the police. So if they were thugs, maybe they used those uniforms, that is yet to be verified. But you could see from the video clips that...
Which video clips? Our report?
I think that was Channel's report.
Okay.
Yesterday or so, or is it AIT report? I think it was AIT report. I could see in Bayelsa, there were people who were at the polling station to vote, and then security forces came and were shooting, and people were running helter-skelter. Armed security personnel are not supposed to come into polling stations with arms. They should be at the perimeter, and if, of course, hoodlums come, that will be quickly communicated to them, and they can now barricade the center. Where arms are seen at the polling station, it has the effect of discouraging people, or some people may even quietly go away, and you can't count the numbers.
How do you respond? I mean, when we spoke to the governor this morning, he said that he's not going to deny that there were reports of violence. I mean, we saw just before we came on the program, our correspondent Kela Megwa giving a report of the biggest polling center, I think at Ajayi Crowther Memorial School, where they have about 100 polling units or so. And there was violence, and by the time they came out of hiding, all the voting materials had disappeared. The governor said he's not going to deny that, but he says it cannot paint the picture of what transpired in the entire state. And as such, you know, a few reports, according to him, a few pockets here and there cannot qualify what transpired in the entire state. What's your response to that?
Let us even look at the atmosphere before the elections itself. There were a lot of crises in Kogi State. Some of the candidates could not even be allowed a free playing field to canvass or vote like others. The case of Natasha is there, you know, where a candidate is attacked right at the center where other politicians were, and nothing was done to restrain her from being assaulted. Now, if you have that kind of climate, people are already intimidated. It was very clear to everybody that the elections in Kogi was going to be bloody. All the analysis, all the pre-election analysis by all stakeholders pointed to that. Now, the stage was already set.
You made reference to reports, I mean, to video clips, though. Yeah. I don't know if your own people, the monitors whom you sent out, how many did you send out, and if they were also recording these clips and sending back to the headquarters of the NHRC?
Now, it depends on the coverage. We don't have the manpower to be in every polling station.
Indeed.
And, of course, movement on election day is highly limited. So most of the monitoring we do to also the safety of the monitors must also be put in place. We encourage them to stay in fixed locations as much as possible, because movement on election day is Herculean. One, transportation is not there. Two, because of the already information on ground of violent incidents, it would be suicidal to have roving monitors without security. So our officers that participated in the voting, the instruction to them was you choose probably a large center where you have many polling stations so that you can monitor what's going on there. We didn't encourage them to start moving around the state all the time. But you can see, monitoring does not have to be done by my staff alone. They link up, they are encouraged to link up with other monitors, you know, in other locations. And the feelers they are getting is there was no smooth election in Kogi State.
So what about Bayelsa? Was that what you also noticed in Bayelsa?
That was similar to Bayelsa. And in fact, the military, held some local government hostage, and people couldn't...
in Bayelsa?
In Bayelsa. There were a lot of places, some local governments, where the military presence was heavy, and people could not freely go to exercise their right to vote.
What's the NHRC going to recommend, you know, as a solution to this, to first and foremost stem the tide of violence? Because, of course, it abridges the rights of people to exercise their franchise freely. And I'm sure that you must have recommendations to that. And I don't know if there's a role for prosecution for you.
We don't prosecute under our mandate, but if we find a situation that warrants prosecution, we recommend that to the prosecuting authorities. But you know, there's this challenge about prosecution of election-related offenses. That burden is presently under the law with INEC. But INEC has said in the past, look, we don't have the capacity to do this. We are focused on elections and other things. We cannot also be burdened with prosecution. And that has left a yawning gap. This issue of prosecution of election-related offenses has never been followed through. And that is why each time after an election, the situation seems worse. We go back to the Justice Uwe's panel report, which, yeah.
We'll come back and we'll take a bit more, because we don't know if your recommendations lie in that Justice Uwe's panel's report. But when we come back, we'll be wrapping up this conversation. Please stay with us. Our closing moments now with Mr. Anthony Ojukwu. He's the Executive Secretary, National Human Rights Commission. But just before we went on break, you're making reference to the Justice Uwe's report. About to slide some recommendations from them. Which one of them is the NHRC going to recommend we stick to?
We will. Our recommendation will be that to deal with the issue of election violence, INEC does not have the capacity to prosecute offenses. INEC should not be it should be an electoral management body, not an election prosecuting body. An election offenses commission needs to be quickly set up by the government so that they will focus squarely on the issue of election offenses. As long as people get away with committing offenses during election, there's nothing you can do. Because if you leave it to the attorney generals, what they do is all the ones against their party, they enter a nolle, and that's the end of the case. But an election offenses commission should be empowered to deal squarely with all reported election-related offenses.
Regardless of the party?
Regardless of the party involved. That's the only way we can make progress. Because don't forget that most of the violence is perpetrated on behalf of politicians. And if it is for the party that is in power, well, the attorney general exercises the power of nolle, and then you cannot even go on with the prosecution. That is, if the case even sees the light of the day. So, as a people who must be committed to this process, the other thing we are looking at is we need to find a way to eliminate the human element in our elections. It's becoming very obvious every day that we cannot help succumbing to the attractions of trying to rig or trying to win at all costs. You know, it's human. So the best thing we can do now, the situation in Kogi and Bayelsa should not be for us to be crying. We need to do something. We need to now migrate into electronic elections.
Well, some people argue that you still have to deploy the electronic voting anyway. People will still have to carry the machines to the polling stations and what have you not.
We can, you see, this is a man-made problem. We can sit down and configure our own elections in a way that it will be foolproof. It's not rocket science. You know, after all, look at when we came out with modified open ballot system during Professor Humphrey Mosu's days. All we did was we just sat down and said, look, people were pregnant with ballot papers. They go into a cubicle where nobody will see them. And even though they are supposed to have one vote, but they can offload 500 into the voter's box. So we now said, look, that what is required is secrecy of voting, of thumb printing. But you can come out to the public and cast your ballot so that we see that it's only one. So there's no perfect, stereotype way of carrying out electronic voting. We can look at those things that is a challenge in our society and decide to design one that can beat it. And in that way, we'll be able to eliminate the human element so that we can start having credibility attached to our elections. As far as I'm concerned now, what we're doing now is anybody who has the power dictates what happens, and that's it. It's
a really sad situation in terms of what is going on with the process. We're hoping that that conversation will happen in terms of bettering the process and ensuring that Nigerians get the kind of elections which they truly desire, which is free, fair, and credible elections. We have to thank you for coming on Sunrise Daily, Mr. Anthony Ojukwu, Executive Secretary of the National Human Rights Commission.
Thank you, Marco, for having me.
Well, that's where we wrap it up this morning on Sunrise Daily. What a ride it's been from getting stuck in traffic and finally making it. You know, it's been full of miracles this morning. And we have to thank you for sticking with us. We also hope that your day is full of miracles as well. From here in Abuja, I'm Maokwe Ogun Yusuf.
And from Lagos, I'm Ayo Makinde. Have a beautiful day.